Welcome, AP Research, to week 7. This is an exciting week for you all. It shouldn't be too heavy on the assignments. Really what we're going to look at in this week is understanding your methodology. So what I want to do in this video is to walk you through the major assignments for this week, discuss what they look like, and help you understand this idea of methodology. Because at this point, you've done a couple of things. And I know many of you guys are maybe still kind of figuring out what exactly the research question is or how to exactly carry out your research idea. Some people are even saying, I need a new project and I don't like the one I've picked after reading chapter 9 and doing the pre-mortem and thinking about maybe this is not the thing I want to spend a whole year on, which is perfectly fine to do. Just make sure you communicate that with me and we discuss, okay, what is your new idea? And we walk through that. So for most people in here who have an idea, who've been working on this is what you've done so far. And what I want to show you are the parts to the proposal. When you think of your project proposal, think of it like you are working for a company and you have to submit a proposal of an idea. That's kind of what this is. You are going to submit this, you're going to present this either in person, if you're choosing hybrid, to the group of kids that you're around, or online, if you're going to be virtual. I'm going to ask you to record your project proposal, and I'll explain that some more, okay? Your proposal is going to consist of several different slides, several different pieces of information, and up until this point, we have a couple of things figured out. Title, we're still working on a title, but give me a title, and I'll show you some examples of previous titles. Problem statement. So you guys did this. This is going back to assignment number 12, where you say there's a problem with blank, and this is where I want to slowly start to introduce my research idea, my research question. And that research question is really important. As I told many of you guys before, make sure that you're asking a question that is open-ended, that is not, is there this or is there this? Excuse me. But is usually starting with a question like how. And how is a great question to ask, because that's saying, what is the correlation, or how does this influence this? And it leads for a lot of ability for you to explain that more. Not, does this influence this, which is a yes. Well, then where do you go from there? So how questions are great to give you the idea of what we can look at, these big questions, these big topics that you're going to get into, and to give into the nuances of it, if you will, and talk about the specifics. Okay, so hows are good as my piece of information there. The previous week, so week 6, you gave me definitions. And you gave me terms that need to be defined and discussed to understand your project more and how you want to use them. You also gave me assumptions and hypotheses, right? Or at least maybe some assumptions, right? I'm assuming that people know about this, and my hypothesis is this. On this point, let me just take a moment. Your hypothesis is what you're going to test, right? So let's say my question is, just stupid question here, but how does one's choice of donuts affect their car they drive or something, their car choice that they drive, right? Does the car that you drive, is there any correlation with that and the donut that you would rather prefer? Stupid question, I know. But my hypothesis would be, I think that there is a strong correlation between the choice of donuts. If a person picks a rather sweet donut, they are going to drive a really fast car. That's my hypothesis, okay? It's pretty specific. I want to be able to test that, right? So my research question is, how does this? My hypothesis is a very small part of that, where I'm saying, I think this is going to have an impact. I believe this will affect this other element, and then I test it out, okay? If your hypothesis is proven wrong, no big deal. If it's proven correct, no big deal in some ways, and that like you are just testing a small question of a very big area of research. So don't feel that if your hypothesis is wrong, that you're not going to do well in this class, you're not going to do well in the AP exam. Not at all. Part of research is wondering a question and coming up with this, and then to test it. And if it's proven no, well then at least you've proven that. You've shown where there is no correlation between car choice and donut choice, if you will, okay? And then the last one you had to answer for me, this is, I think, assignment number 25 maybe, is the significance. Why do this? And this is really important to kind of understand and explain. And if you have a hard time on this, then maybe reevaluate whether or not you want to continue to do this project. Is it really worth it? Is it really something that you're interested in, okay? All right, so all of this was week 6, right? So now we're in here on week 7, and I want to take a few minutes and talk about this one. Okay, so your proposed method of inquiry, this is assignment number 26. If I take a second here and I bring up assignment 26, this is what essentially it looks like. I'll see if I can zoom in on a little bit. What you're going to do is you're going to read through a couple of key things to know. Just ways that we want to use terms, and maybe you want to talk about deductive knowledge and inductive knowledge. And I'm going to ask you, what's the difference? Positivism or phenomenology. That's a tough one to say. And what you're going to look at as far as how you're going to study something. Primary or secondary data, you guys understand this. Here's a big one. Qualitative or quantitative. When you want to conduct a study and you present your overall method of inquiry, you want to tell me if you're doing a quantitative, meaning you're only looking at data and numbers. A qualitative, meaning you're looking at characteristics, things that are more descriptive in nature. Things are more opinion driven, if you will, more subjective in nature, or if you do a mixed study, right? So if I'm looking at both the number of donuts that you eat or whatever, and I'm looking at, quantitative data and qualitative data, right? How do you feel about this kind of donuts? Strong, negative, that kind of thing. That's a qualitative piece of information because it's on a degree and it's subjective. Quantitative data is going to be that more kind of like numeric data, okay? A lot of people do mixed studies, and that's perfectly fine to say I'm doing a mixed study because I'm looking at both, okay? Again, there's advantages and disadvantages in looking at the approach you want to use. And what I want you to do is read through 6, 7, and 8, and then just tell me 2 things you learned, okay? The big part of assignment 26 is what I'm about to show you. This is a list of about 20 different research methods that you can use. You have to pick one, and you got to figure out what's the best one for your research project. I can't pick it for you. This is something we can have a conversation with, but that I need you to understand, okay, here's what I think is the best tool to test my hypothesis and my research question. Okay, so here we go. Here's the list of them. I'm going to give you this sheet, so don't feel like you haven't seen this. It's on there, assignment 26. But let me just describe each one of them pretty quickly, okay? Action research is when you're going to have a problem and you identify it's a problem, and then you have a solution, and then you kind of review it. So if you think that you can solve a problem with an issue, something that you create, a solution, and then you can see if it's resolved, that's an action research, okay? A case study research is when you look at a specific group. So if you want to see within a particular element, if you're looking at teachers or students or a specific group, and to see how that group addresses and reacts to a certain situation, that's a case study research, okay? A causal comparative research. This is when you see if there's a causal relationship. Now, correlation means these two things kind of correlate, they kind of relate. Causal, this causes this, okay? So if you do a causal comparative research, you want to see how strong that relationship is, and what kind of variables that need to maybe be changed, or what kind of variables exist that really can't be controlled to kind of cause these two things, okay? I don't see many causal relationships. Usually we look at more correlational studies, okay? But I'll go here first, content analysis. If you want to look at commercials, if you want to analyze, TV shows, if you're analyzing TikTok videos, if you're analyzing something for content, right? You're analyzing text and you're making inferences. That's a content analysis, because you are going out and looking at content that's already out there and you're analyzing it to see if there's a bias, to see if there's a message being in there, okay? Correlational research, this is what a lot of my students do, where they try to collect data to determine if there's a correlation between variables, right? I just want to see if there's a correlation between this and this. And again, that's a great kind of how question to ask, okay? Critical incident technique. This is kind of like determining like why a critical event happened. So trying to maybe like understand why a terrorist attack happened, or looking at a critical event and describing that more. I've never had a student do critical incident technique, but if that's something that interests you, let me know. Delphi research. This is kind of looking at like future events and like forecasting, where you're going to create a project and you are trying to say this is probably going to happen based on what is happening. Again, that's a unique one there, but you can do that. Descriptive research, study of as-is phenomena. So why are things the way they are? And you explain that. And you try to give understanding in a project on why this is occurring the way that it's occurring. Okay? An ethnographic study, This is an observation of a specific cultural group to identify patterns and trends. So if you're looking at, particularly within an element of society that you want to study and analyze, an ethnographic study is going to be like what you're getting into. And you can kind of mix some of these. Like you could talk about, I'm going to do an ethnographic content analysis. And I'm going to look at, within a content analysis, I'm looking at it for a particular ethnographic, right? So you can kind of mix some of these together. Don't feel like you have to have one. Or I'm doing a correlational study based on ethnographic data on blank, right? And to see if there's a correlation between this and this. So you can have some flexibility in mixing a couple of these if that interests you, okay? Evaluation research, you study the effectiveness of an intervention or program. So like drunk driving kind of thing, is like, how is that effective? I had a student last year do the cell phone data and whether or not the cell phone policy was effective. That's an evaluation research method. Grounded theory, this produces a theory that explains a process based on an observation. I'm going to roll through some of these because some of them are probably not going to be used, but hermeneutic research. This is where you're studying the meaning of subjects or texts by concentrating on the historical meaning of the experience and its development and cumulative effects on the individual and society. So looking at things definitely from a historical perspective and looking at how a group was kind of portrayed and how that had an influence on them, going forward. Historical research is just historical research. That's something that I did for my master's degree, and that's really interesting and that's fun. Meta-analysis research, this is where you try to seek patterns in data. If you're doing a meta-analysis study, you're basically saying this study was done and this study was done, and I'm going to try to compare the two and see if there's a correlation. And I'm going to try to see if I'm going to look at previous research and draw out new insights. That can be somewhat tricky, but that's a good one to use if that's something you're looking into data. Narrative is like study of a single person's experience. I would advise you to maybe stay away from that. Needs assessment, systemic process to determine the needs of a defined demographic population. Phenomenology makes sense of lived experiences of participants regarding a specific phenomena. So if you're able to like interview people that, and maybe you want to go like school integration and you want to talk about, what was it like to be an African-American child or teenager in EC class in the 1970s. And that's a project you want to go and you want to have a lot of kind of in-person interviews, you could definitely go that direction, okay? Quasi-experimental, this is when you kind of manipulate some variables of populations within a benefit to kind of see, like, is there a benefit? Is there an influence on this? I had a student a couple of years ago to try to see kind of like a marshmallow test. If you take an AP psychology, where she gave you a cup of M&Ms, maybe you got the cup of M&Ms, right? And if you didn't touch that cup of M&Ms, you got another cup of M&Ms, right? But if you couldn't help yourself, right, she wanted to see, did that have a correlation with your grade? So she was basically doing like a quasi-experimental correlational study that kind of compared your impulse to eat M&Ms and your GPA. Whew, that's a mouthful, but that's a really cool study, okay? Repertory grid analysis. I've never had a student do this one, so I don't have a lot of experience on that. Trend analysis, formulate a forecast based on a regression analysis of data. Again, you're looking at a ton of data on that. Or I did have a student do a true experimental design in which you're going to basically structure research with isolated variables and controls. One of my students wanted to grow Brussels sprouts and introduce and to see if a new kind of soil would help them grow more. It was a very cool project, and she was able to get some awesome results. Okay, so for assignment 26, You're going to look at the following. I want you to pick one that you would like to use for your research project, okay? And provide an explanation as to why you think that's the best one. And again, if you think you want to kind of compare it, like you're doing a correlational ethnographic study, or you're doing a content analysis to see, right? Just explain that for me a little bit, because what I want you to do is be able to write it out. And when you look at your project, here's an example of one that I kind of curated on my own. Okay, so here's just a project statement that I made, problem statement that I made, and just interesting to me. There's a problem with the lack of Hispanic Latino culture in major American media outlets. Despite a greater emphasis on more diversity within the media, Latinos and Hispanics are still greatly underrepresented in commercials, television shows, and movies. This problem has negatively affected Latino culture within America, who fail to see their own culture presented in America, even though they comprise the second largest demographic group in the United States, based on the 2010 census, and are the fastest growing demographic group in America. A possible cause of this problem is the reluctance of American media markets to appeal towards Latino and Hispanic Americans due to the lack of political agency, lack of interest, and pervasive negative stereotypes. And here's where I get to the methodology. Okay. Perhaps a study which investigates the lack of Hispanic and Latino diversity in American media by a mixed method ethnographic study could remedy the situation. This part here is what you're going to add. Okay. So here's a real quick research question for one of my students. She did this last year. You'll look at the project in assignment 29, but she's looking at the cell phone data. And her proposed method is to basically say, hey, I'm going to be using a mixed method evaluation study that analyzes how cell phone data or the cell phone ban, how did it impact students' focus on the classroom and discipline issues, okay? So what you've done up until this point is you've done this. This is assignment number 12. Now we're basically going to rehash it. Let's do it again, and let's add this part. Perhaps a study which investigates blank by a blank method. That's essentially where you're going to lay in and you're going to discuss what method you want to talk about, right? So what do you want to investigate? A correlation investigates, this issue. If I go back to mine, perhaps a study which investigates the overall problem, the lack of Hispanic and Latino diversity in American media, which is what I try to provide context for right here, right? And you give me the method. Okay, that's assignment 27. You're just going to turn that back into me. Assignment 28, I've got a really cool research paper that I want you to use. It's not a research paper, but it's a cool study that was done on what you would give up or how attached you are to your cell phone. It's really cool. You're going to answer for me some questions on that. And then assignment 29, I'm just going to give you a bunch of proposals that I want you to analyze. And there'll be a few directions to go along with that, but it'll be a pretty straightforward assignment. I just want you to go through and see some projects that were done in the past, and I'll take the names off of good ones, not so good ones, and just terrible ones, and you can analyze them a little bit. Okay, sorry this is a really long video, but I wanted to give you a quick overview of week number 7. This is the only video I'm going to give you all. Unless you want to communicate with me otherwise, reach out to me in a Zoom, and I look forward to seeing you guys soon. See y'all. Bye.